How does a penny and a piece of copper wire buried in the dirt next to a stump produce more deer visits than a $24 commercial mineral block? Last November, on a lease in southern Pennsylvania, I ran a side-by-side test that I almost did not believe when I pulled the cameras. One stump got a standard mineral block from the feed store, the kind with the picture of a buck on it. The other stump, 200 yards away on the same ridge, roughly the distance from one end zone to the other, got a post-1982 penny and a 6-inch piece of bare copper electrical wire twisted together and pushed into the dirt at the base of the stump. Total cost of the mineral block was $24. Total cost of the penny and wire was about 15 cents. The mineral block stump had 22 deer visits in the first 2 weeks on a Moultrie cellular camera. Respectable. The copper and zinc stump had 38 visits in the same 2 weeks. Same ridge, same timber type, same deer population. The 15-cent setup outperformed the $24 block by roughly 70%. I checked the cameras twice, walked back to the truck, sat there for 10 minutes, and checked them again because I was convinced I had mixed up the SD cards. I had not. The penny and wire stump was pulling nearly twice the deer traffic of the commercial block. And the deer at the galvanic site were not just sniffing and leaving. They were licking the dirt, pawing at the base of the stump, coming back to the same spot on consecutive days. Whatever was in that soil, they wanted more of it. I did not understand why until I started reading about galvanic corrosion and realized that the chemistry happening in the dirt between those two metals is producing something a mineral block cannot replicate. And that chemistry is the subject of this video. I am going to explain exactly what is happening at the molecular level when copper and zinc touch wet soil, exactly how to set it up, and exactly where to place it relative to your stand, so you can run your own camera test this season. Stay until the end, because there is a soil moisture trick that roughly doubles the ion release rate and turns a passive setup into something that pulls deer from 3 times the distance of the standard application. Before you try this, check your state wildlife agency website. Mineral attractants, including anything that deposits minerals into the soil, are classified as bait in several states and restricted or prohibited in CWD management zones. What is legal in Georgia may get you a citation in Wisconsin. 5 minutes of research protects your tag and your record. I would rather you skip this entire technique than use it somewhere it violates your state regulations. The science starts with 2 metals and 1 condition. The 2 metals are copper and zinc. The condition is moisture. When copper and zinc are in physical contact with each other, and both are in contact with an electrolyte, which is any liquid that can carry an electric charge, and in nature that means rainwater, dew, or damp soil, a galvanic cell forms between the 2 metals. This is the exact same reaction that causes a car battery to produce electricity. Zinc is more reactive than copper on the galvanic series, which is a ranking of how easily metals give up electrons. Because zinc is more reactive, it acts as the anode, which means it donates electrons to the copper. As the zinc donates electrons, it dissolves. The zinc atoms leave the metal surface and enter the soil as zinc ions. Simultaneously, the copper surface attracts hydrogen ions from the moisture and facilitates a reduction reaction that releases trace amounts of copper ions into the surrounding soil. The result is a slow, continuous release of zinc and copper ions into the dirt around the contact point. Not a pile of minerals sitting on the surface like a mineral block. Ions, dissolved into the soil moisture, carried by capillary action through the surrounding dirt and volatilized into the air as the soil surface evaporates. Those ions are detectable by a deer's nose at distances that a solid mineral block cannot match, because the ions are in gaseous form, riding on soil moisture evaporation, the same way any volatile scent compound travels. A mineral block sits on the surface and releases minerals only through direct contact and slow rainwater dissolution. The galvanic cell releases minerals continuously, 24 hours a day, as long as the metals are in contact with moisture. Rain accelerates the process. Dew accelerates it. Even overnight humidity condensing on the soil surface is enough to keep the reaction going. The practical difference is range. A commercial mineral block attracts deer from roughly 30 to 50 yards because the mineral scent is concentrated at the surface and disperses slowly. The galvanic ion release attracts deer from roughly 80 to 120 yards, about the length of a football field, Because the dissolved ions volatilize from a wider area of soil surface and travel further on thermals and wind. I am not a chemist. A materials science professor would probably explain the electrode potentials and Nernst equation better than I can. But I do not need to understand the math to understand the results. But the trail camera data tells the story, and the story is that the galvanic setup consistently outperforms surface mineral applications in every test. I have run across 4 properties over 2 seasons. And I want to be clear that 4 properties in 2 seasons is not proof of anything. It is anecdotal data from one guy with a notebook and some cameras. Your soil type, your moisture levels, your local deer density, and your existing mineral availability will all affect how well this works on your ground. Run your own test. Put a camera on it for 3 weeks and let the photos tell you whether it works where you hunt. I am not selling anything. I am telling you what I found. The setup costs less than the gas to drive to the feed store, and it takes about 90 seconds. Everything in this video, plus 60 more field-tested techniques, is in the Buck Hunter's Bible. 90 pages of deer behavior, science, scent control, scouting methods, stand placement, and rut phase tactics with a quick reference card you can take to the stand. Link in the description below, QR code on screen. The materials are simple. You need a post-1982 U.S. penny. That year matters because pennies minted after 1982 are 97.5% zinc with a thin copper plating. Pennies minted before 1982 are 95% copper with no zinc core. You need the zinc. The penny is your zinc source. You also need a 4 to 6 inch piece of bare copper wire, the kind electricians use for grounding, roughly 12 or 14 gauge, about the thickness of a wooden matchstick. You can buy a foot of it at any hardware store for under a dime or strip the insulation off a scrap piece of Romex house wiring. Twist the copper wire tightly around the penny so both metals are in firm physical contact. The connection point is where the electron transfer happens, so a tight wrap is better than a loose loop. You want metal-to-metal contact, not metal separated by an air gap. That is your galvanic cell. 1 penny, 1 wire, 15 cents. I make 10 of these at a time on my kitchen table in about 5 minutes. I keep them in a Ziploc bag in my truck, so I always have a few ready when I find a new location worth testing. My Drake jacket pockets are full of twisted pennies by October. The cashier at the gas station where I stop for coffee on the way to the stand watched me pull 6 pennies with copper wire twisted around them out of my pocket while looking for change and asked me what they were. I told her they were deer magnets. She did not ask a follow-up question. Push the penny and wire assembly into the dirt at the base of a stump, a log, or a fence post, about 2 inches deep, roughly the depth of your first knuckle to your second knuckle on your index finger. The metals need to be in contact with soil moisture, not sitting on top of dry leaves. If the soil is dry at the surface, push it down to where the dirt feels damp. Cover it with a thin layer of soil and leaf litter. You are not burying it deep. You are putting it at the interface between dry surface and moist subsurface, where capillary action will continuously draw moisture across the metal surfaces and carry the released ions upward to the surface where they can volatilize. If you are placing the setup near a stump, push it into the soil on the north side of the stump, where the ground stays moist longer because the stump shades it from direct sun. The north side of any large stump or log is typically 15 to 20% more moist than the south side, which means the galvanic reaction runs longer between rain events. Yeah, I did not figure this out until my second season running these setups. The first season, I just pushed them into whatever side of the stump was easiest to reach. The second season, I consistently placed them on the north or northeast side, and the camera performance improved noticeably. Not a huge difference, but a consistent one. Moisture is the fuel. Put the cell where the fuel lasts longest. Placement relative to your stand follows the same rules as any mineral site. You want the setup 15 to 25 yards from your shooting position, roughly the distance from the pitcher's mound to home plate. Downwind of your stand on the prevailing wind, so deer approaching the mineral source from downwind do not cross your scent column before reaching the setup. And on a trail or near a terrain feature that deer already use, like a scrape, a rub line, which is a series of trees where bucks have scraped bark with their antlers along a travel route or a trail intersection. I made the mistake of placing my first test setup in the middle of a flat with no existing deer sign and got almost no response for the first 10 days. moved it 40 yards to the base of a stump on a known travel corridor, and had deer on camera within 48 hours. The galvanic cell attracts deer, but it does not create traffic where none exists. I learned this the hard way. My first test was on a flat piece of open timber, with no trails, no scrapes, no rubs, nothing. I was so excited about the chemistry that I forgot the most basic rule of hunting, which is that you need deer in the area before you can attract them to a specific point. It amplifies existing movement patterns. Same principle from the fermented ash video. The mineral chemistry pulls deer off their line toward your setup, but there has to be a line to pull from. A buddy who hunts public land in central Georgia ran this test last fall on a WMA, which is a wildlife management area, a publicly accessible hunting area managed by the state wildlife agency. He placed one galvanic cell at the base of a white oak on a ridge saddle and another on a creek crossing 300 yards away. The saddle setup produced 14 buck visits in 3 weeks, including a 3.5-year-old 8-point that showed up 4 times in daylight. The creek crossing produced 8 visits, mostly does. Same metals, same preparation, different terrain features. The saddle concentrated deer movement through a natural funnel, which is a narrow strip of terrain that forces deer to pass through a specific area, and the galvanic cell turned that funnel into a stopping point instead of a pass-through. He killed the 8-point on November 8th at 23 yards from an Ameristep ground blind while the deer was licking the dirt at the base of the stump. He said the deer stood at that spot for nearly 30 seconds working the soil with its tongue before he felt comfortable enough with the shot angle to release. 30 seconds. From a deer that had survived 3 hunting seasons on a public WMA, the mineral pull overrode every survival instinct that Buck had developed over 3 years of dodging hunters on pressured ground. 23 yards. The deer walked to the 15-cent setup and stood there long enough for him to draw his Hoyt and settle his pin. The cost comparison with commercial minerals is where this gets uncomfortable for anyone who has been buying mineral blocks for years. A standard mineral block costs $18 to $28 depending on the brand. It lasts roughly 4 to 6 weeks before it dissolves completely in rain and needs to be replaced. A serious mineral program runs 3 to 4 blocks per season at $20 to $25 each. Call it $80 to $100 per year. Over 10 years, that is $800 to $1,000 on blocks that dissolve, wash away, and need constant replacement. The galvanic cell costs 15 cents, and the zinc penny takes roughly 18 to 24 months to fully dissolve in average soil conditions. When it does, you replace it with another penny. 15 cents every 2 years versus $100 every year. Over 10 years, the galvanic approach costs you about 75 cents. The commercial approach costs you roughly $1,000. Think about that for a second. $1,000. $1,000 on mineral blocks that dissolve in the rain versus 75 cents on a penny that dissolves in the dirt and does the same job continuously. The condition where this does not work well is in extremely dry climates or during extended drought. The galvanic reaction requires moisture as the electrolyte. In a soil that has been dry for 3 or more weeks with no rain and no dew formation, the reaction effectively stops because there is no electrolyte bridging the 2 metals. In that situation, the penny and wire are just 2 pieces of metal sitting in dry dirt doing nothing. If you hunt in West Texas, the desert Southwest, or any area where extended dry periods are normal during hunting season, this technique is unreliable unless you supplement the moisture artificially, which I will get to in a moment. In areas with regular rainfall or morning dew, which covers the majority of whitetail range east of the 100th meridian, the soil stays moist enough to sustain the reaction continuously from placement through the entire hunting season. I tested this in northern Maine during a dry October stretch where we had no rain for 11 days. The camera activity at my galvanic site dropped to nearly 0 by day 7. On day 12, we got a ½ inch of rain, and the camera picked up 4 deer visits within 36 hours of the rain. The reaction resumed immediately once moisture returned. The deer were waiting for it. They had memorized the location during the wet period and came back to check it repeatedly even when the site was inactive. That pattern tells me something important about how deer catalog mineral sources in their home range. They do not forget. A mineral site that produces once becomes a checkpoint they visit periodically for months or years afterward, same way they check natural clay licks and burn sites. Your galvanic cell is creating a permanent waypoint in that buck's mental map of the property. Even if the reaction pauses during a dry spell, the site remains in the deer's rotation. They knew the mineral source was there. They just could not detect it until the rain reactivated the ion release. Look, everything I am walking through here is in the Buck Hunter's Bible. 90 pages, scent control, scouting, stand placement, rut tactics, plus a quick reference card for the stand. Link in the description, QR code on screen. The soil moisture trick I promised at the beginning is this. Before you push the penny and wire into the ground, dig a hole about 4 inches deep and 4 inches across, roughly the size of a coffee mug. Place the galvanic cell in the bottom of the hole. Then pack the hole with a mixture of soil and roughly a 1/4 cup of coarse rock salt, about a palmful. The salt does 2 things. First, it dramatically increases the conductivity of the soil moisture around the metals. Salt water is a far better electrolyte than plain water, which means the galvanic reaction runs faster and produces more ions per hour. The ion release rate roughly doubles compared to unsalted soil, which extends the detection range from that 80 to 120 yard baseline to something closer to 150 to 200 yards, roughly a football field and a half to 2 football fields. Second, the salt itself is a sodium source that deer crave, which we covered in the Whitetail Facts video. The combination of sodium from the salt, zinc ions from the penny, and copper ions from the wire creates a 3-mineral site that addresses 3 different nutritional demands simultaneously. Sodium for electrolyte balance, zinc for immune function and antler growth, copper for connective tissue and red blood cell production. That is the same mineral combination in a wildlife research center mineral supplement that costs $22 per bag. You are producing it from a penny, a wire, and a palmful of salt for roughly 20 cents total. My wife saw me digging a 4-inch hole next to a stump and filling it with pennies and salt last September, and asked if I was performing some kind of ritual. I told her it was electrochemistry. She said it looked like I was burying treasure for squirrels. She is not entirely wrong, but the Moultrie camera on that stump produced 44 deer visits in the first 3 weeks after the salted setup was installed on a property in Buffalo County, Wisconsin, including 6 different bucks and a mainframe 10-point I had never photographed before on that lease. Same property, same stump, same camera position. The unsalted setup 40 yards away, on a different stump, produced 19 visits in the same period. The salt more than doubled the traffic. I will be honest, I expected some improvement from the salt addition because of the conductivity increase. I did not expect it to more than double the result. The sodium attraction layered on top of the zinc and copper ions created a 3-signal pull that the unsalted setup could not match. Each mineral addresses a different biological need, and the deer's response to all 3 simultaneously is stronger than the response to any one alone. The salt more than doubled the traffic. 1 palmful of salt. The penny and wire do the heavy lifting. The salt is what makes it pull deer from distances that a mineral block cannot touch. I run 3 of these galvanic sites on every property I hunt now. 1 on the primary trail between bedding and food. 1 near my best rut stand on a known scrape line, and 1 on the edge of my sanctuary zone as a camera inventory site for summer scouting. Total cost for all 3 sites is less than 75 cents, including the salt. The commercial mineral program I was running before cost me $280 per year across the same 3 properties. 4 blocks per property, 3 properties, replaced every 6 weeks through the summer and fall scouting season. 12 blocks at roughly $23 each. I was hauling mineral blocks in the back of my truck like I was running a feed store delivery route. My Savage 110 in the gun case weighed less than my mineral supply in the bed. That entire program is now replaced by 9 pennies, 9 pieces of wire, and 3 palmfuls of salt. I replaced a $280 annual expense with a 75-cent annual investment, and the camera data improved. My Drake jacket cost more than a decade of galvanic mineral sites. That math changed how I think about every product in the pro shop. The next time you walk into a sporting goods store, and see the mineral aisle with the $24 blocks and the $18 powder bags and the $30 liquid concentrates, remember that the active mechanism in every one of those products is the same thing a penny and a wire produce in wet soil for free. The minerals are the same. The delivery method is different, and the deer could not care less about the delivery method. They care about the ions. Give them the ions and they will show up. A penny will do that for you. Every single day it rains, every morning the dew forms, and every time the humidity rises above 60%. That is most days in most of whitetail country from May through December. A penny will do that for you every single day it is in the ground. And when someone at deer camp asks what mineral product you are running, you can decide how much you want to tell them. Some things sound crazy until you check the camera.